can go ahead, Senator. I think everybody's in the room.
All righty then. Well, good evening and welcome to all of you who were kind enough to join us this evening for the District 19 Town Hall. Welcome, and we appreciate your taking the time to visit with us this evening. I am Ben Kramer, one of the 4 members of our state legislative team that represents you in Annapolis. And it is great to be a member of the Fightin' 19th District. And I can assure you that there is no harder working delegation in all of Annapolis. And we each bring our unique styles and skill sets to what we do in the legislature. We each serve on varying committees. We really have very little overlap. Delegate Cullison is on Health and Government Operations. Delegate Crutchfield is on the Judiciary Committee, and Delegate Stewart serves on Environment and Transportation, and I'm on the Finance Committee. So between our 4 committees, we cover a tremendous amount of the areas that the legislature has jurisdiction over. And we work very well as a team, both in Annapolis as well as back here at home. And we very much appreciate when we hear from you all, because a lot of the work that we do originates with everybody here back home. So having an opportunity to share with you on a night like this is great for us. And this is where we get a lot of the ideas for what we work on. I want to say thank you to Michael Tardif from the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. He is the talent behind putting together tonight's event. And we are going to lead off this evening with Delegate Stewart, who is going to first discuss a little bit about the special session that will be coming up on December 6th in Annapolis. And we will be taking up during that special session both redistricting of congressional maps as well as overrides of the ill-conceived vetoes of Governor Larry Hogan. And I anticipate we'll get all that good legislation that he sidetracked back on Main Street and doing the people of the state of Maryland a lot of good with their passage. And with that, I will turn it over to Delegate Stewart, and following Delegate Stewart will be Delegate Crutchfield, then Delegate Cullison, and then I'll wrap up with a little bit of information about what's going on in the Finance Committee and what I'll be working on this coming session. So with that, I welcome Delegate Stewart to talk about special session and his work in his committee.
Thank you, Mr. Senator. I appreciate it. Well, first, I just have to thank all my colleagues for allowing us to go in reverse alphabetical order for a change tonight. I feel like I'm kind of undoing 3 decades of my own trauma being at the back end of the alphabet. And now the tables have turned and it feels great. So for all of you fellow second half of the alphabet folks, tonight is for you. So jokes aside, it is really great to see all of you tonight. A lot of friendly faces in the virtual crowd. It's really the honor of my lifetime to serve you in Annapolis. And your trust in me is not taken lightly. And I'm really also grateful to serve alongside 3 amazing legislators in Senator Kramer and Delegates Cullison and Crutchfield. All 3 are mentors and confidants and friends of mine. And it's really a pleasure to be able to campaign alongside them for the next several months for the opportunity to serve you for the next 4 years. And so while, as Senator Kramer mentioned, is we're mostly going to be discussing the regular session, which starts in January 2022, I wanted to also note first that in about a month, the General Assembly will convene to hold a week-long, we think, special session that begins Monday, December the 6th. And as Senator Kramer noted, we essentially have 2 items on the agenda. One is congressional redistricting, and the other are veto overrides. And so first on congressional redistricting, we unfortunately don't have a ton to share with you. The legislature, the General Assembly has convened a bipartisan legislative redistricting advisory committee with the acronym of LRAC to draw the congressional maps. And it's been taking public input over the last several weeks and maybe even a couple of months now. And I believe the Montgomery County meeting was actually last week. And the plan for LRAC is to produce draft maps for public comment by 1 week from today, November the 15th. And so if you have any thoughts, any sort of last minute thoughts here in the last week before they submit draft maps, we'd urge you to reach out to the committee directly. And once I'm done talking, I will post a link in the chat where you can do so. I'll also note that many of you will see that the governor has also created something he's called the Citizens Redistricting Advisory Council or some such. Don't be unnerved if you see that his commission has already released maps. The governor has a relatively limited role in the map making process for both congressional maps and legislative maps. And so his commission, while I'm sure the commissioners themselves endeavored to produce a good work product, it was mostly political theater. And I think the best evidence of that is the fact that it was chaired by one of the leaders of the Cato Institute, which is a well-known right-wing / libertarian think tank. So I just want to note that because I've gotten a few questions or people that were concerned because they saw those maps and they somehow thought those were the maps that we were rolling with, but that is not the case. So moving on to Governor Hogan's, as Senator Kramer said, ill-advised, I believe, vetoes. I think ill-advised is an understatement. I was frankly startled by not only the breadth of the vetoes from this past spring, but also the fact that he vetoed so many bills that were bipartisan and otherwise just commonsensical. I'll run through a few of them now. And while we have not received a list, much like the maps, which we haven't looked at, none of the four of us have seen any draft maps. We're all looking forward to November 15th, just like you guys are, because we haven't seen anything either. Similarly, we have not seen any sort of veto list. So we would only be guessing if I were to say, well, maybe this veto will be overridden or that one won't. Obviously, our sincere hopes, since all four of us voted for every single one of these bills, is that we override every single one of Governor Hogan's vetoes. But I wanted to run through a few of them tonight. So first, the one that's nearest and dearest to my heart by far is HB 16, which is the Dignity Not Detention Act. This is actually my bill, and it basically bans for-profit ICE detention centers in Maryland. We currently have 3 of these, and the story is that there are deplorable conditions. And what the bill simply says is that no one should be profiting from human misery or from family separation. And many of you are probably aware of the conditions that have been reported in some of these facilities, including medical neglect and worms in food and sleeping on floors and other places around the country. There have even been forced hysterectomies and sexual assault. So these are really, really bad places. And the people that are being picked up are just members of our community that just happen to be undocumented. The vast majority of them have never been convicted or accused of any sort of serious crime. Their only crime was coming to this country in search of a better opportunity. And unfortunately, Maryland has been complicit in some of ICE's worst depravity. And so this bill will make Maryland a national leader in standing up for our immigrant neighbors. I was really proud that it passed both the House and the Senate with a veto-proof majority, and I will personally relish the opportunity in December to cast a green vote to override Governor Hogan's veto on that one. And I would just note that, while Governor Hogan, not to beat up on him, he plays a really good moderate on MSNBC. I genuinely think he probably deserves an Emmy for some of the performances that I've seen. But in Annapolis, it's not that way at all. And if you read his veto statement on this bill and a few of these others, if you put his veto statement alongside some of the most extremist, most xenophobic rhetoric from President Trump, you would not be able to tell the two apart. Moving on, there are several collective bargaining bills, including SB 746, which would extend collective bargaining rights to workers at state's community college. That's been a long, hard-fought battle. Senator Kramer introduced a collective bargaining measure, SB 9, which would expand collective bargaining rights for University System of Maryland campuses. And then there's also SB 717, which is another higher education collective bargaining measure. It should be no surprise that Governor Hogan, who is far from an advocate for working families, took the opportunity to veto basically any legislation he could find that would boost wages or otherwise support workers. There are two transit bills that he vetoed. One is SB 199, which is a really, really important measure. It's also House Bill 114 for those that are writing it down at home. But this bill would have helped the state catch up on its huge transit maintenance backlog to make sure not only that we have a fully functional transit system as it currently exists, but also a safe one. And for any Metro riders out there who have struggled with delays and with derailments in the past several weeks, you recognize how important this transit funding can be. And so that was a really, really, I think, a short-sighted veto from Governor Hogan. And relatedly, and this one is just kind of petty, there was SB 97, which would have required the state to begin marketing the purple line to make sure people know that it's coming and that it's happening and it's going to be great. Unfortunately, I don't really understand why he vetoed that one as well. Under the sort of similar category of good jobs, there was a really interesting bill, House Bill 278, which would have altered the job creation tax credit program, which basically provides a tax credit to companies for creating jobs in Maryland. Unfortunately, even though this bill or this program as it exists currently is called the Job Creation Tax Credit Program, and this bill that Hogan vetoed would have basically tried to make it the good job creation tax credit. In other words, it would have altered the tax credit to make sure that the companies are creating jobs with decent wages, that they allow for collective bargaining, that they allow for paid leave, that they provide basic health and retirement benefits. Governor Hogan did not like this. He prefers corporate giveaways with no strings attached, and so he vetoed that one as well. And then finally, there were a trio of bills aimed at increasing transparency related to state officials' emergency financial decisions. So this sounds a little bit technical, but basically what this relates to is that Hogan came under fire for some problematic deals during the pandemic, including the state's $9 million purchase of COVID tests from a South Korean company that had to be replaced for an extra $2.5 million, and then a $2.5 million deal for masks and ventilators from a politically connected company in Republican circles that never delivered the goods that the state expected. So this would have basically shown a bit of a light on these sort of emergency financial decisions. For obvious reasons, Governor Hogan didn't like that very much, and so he vetoed those three as well. I look forward to us overriding those three as well as all the other ones I mentioned and the other dozen or so that I did not have time to name tonight. And then I will briefly just kind of run through switching now from December 2021 to January 2022, just briefly what's going to happen in my committee. And I'm sorry if I'm speaking really fast. I want to try to remain in my time strictures here so that we have enough time to answer your questions. But to recap, my committee is the Environment and Transportation Committee, which includes those two topics as well as housing and ethics. And the number one big priority from both last year and probably for the upcoming session is an omnibus climate bill called the Climate Solutions Now Act. Last session, it unfortunately did not pass at the 11th hour after the House and the Senate could not come together over what an amended version of the bill would look like. But there are, I think, talks across chambers have continued over the interim, and it looks like some version of that bill will come forward again. And I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but certainly all four of us are strong believers that the climate crisis is an existential one, and that Maryland should absolutely be a leader and not a follower in terms of fighting it. There will likely be other bills. I see Councilmember Hucker is here. There will likely be bills to bring more transparency to the governor's highway expansion plan. These bills have failed in the past. They've passed the House, generally all of them, but have failed in the Senate. I don't necessarily see that calculus changing anytime soon. And so I think that in terms of the governor's highway expansion plans, I know we got some questions from folks already about that. I think that that's probably up to the gubernatorial election to see what kind of direction that project will take. And then housing will also be a big focus of my committee, because as I'm sure all of you know, the pandemic has really exacerbated a pre-existing housing crisis and affordable housing crisis in this state. And so now that the eviction moratoria, both federal and state, have expired, a number of folks are facing eviction. And we have a really bad problem because we got almost $1 billion from the federal government. Thanks very much to Joe Biden and his congressional allies. We have a ton of money. We're sitting on a bunch of money in rental assistance funds. We have enough money to actually cancel the rent debt for every single renter in Maryland twice. And yet we were just condemned last week by the federal government for not spending our money quickly enough. We are actually one of the worst performing states in the country. We have not even spent 30% of it, mostly due to bureaucratic incompetence and mismanagement from the government, from the Hogan administration. But there's a lot of work to do on that, and a lot of, from both a sort of competence perspective and just a moral perspective, we need to do a better job administering those funds so that both landlords and tenants can benefit from them. And then very, very briefly, in terms of my bills, they tend to focus broadly on the environment, both climate and also clean air and water, and economic justice, particularly ensuring that every Marylander has a safe and affordable place to live. And that sort of legislative focus of mine is not changing this session. So very briefly, I'm reintroducing a bipartisan renters' rights bill called the Tenant Protection Act. I have a bill targeting carcinogenic driveway sealants. I've been working very closely with my colleagues in District 19, especially Delegate Cullison, on a bill that would create a tax credit for long-term care insurance premiums, which is, I know, a problem that a lot of folks in District 19 struggle with. I'm also putting in kind of like the more utopian lane, I'm putting in a tax credit bill for companies that experiment with a 4-day work week. In the aftermath of the pandemic, there's been a lot of research suggesting that actually by cutting workers' hours but keeping their pay the same, you can boost productivity and wellness. And a lot of companies have been experimenting with this, and I think there would be in public interest for the state to incentivize that experimentation. And then I have another bill that will be relatively high profile that will remove ratepayer subsidies for dirty energy sources like trash incineration. Basically, it gets kind of technical, but we have something called the Renewable Portfolio Standard in Maryland, which subsidizes a bunch of different energy. I think that we should be subsidizing mostly solar and wind because those are clean, but unfortunately the status quo subsidizes all kinds of dirty energy, including literally burning trash. So I have a bill to once and for all finish this fight that a lot of other people have taken on in the last couple of decades. And then finally, also in kind of the weirder category, I have a constitutional amendment bill that would create a statewide position, a state elected position of the public advocate. This is something that New York City and a bunch of other places in the country have. And I think it would be cool to have a watchdog for basically the state government. And that is it. I think I blew way over time, but without further ado, I'm actually not sure which of my two brilliant female colleagues are going next. Okay, so without further ado, the one, the only, the indomitable Delegate Bonnie Cullison.
Thank you, Vaughn. Yes, we need to make sure that we are doing the reverse alphabetical order correctly. So that would be me next. So thank you all. Thank you all for being here. I want to add my thanks to the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee for helping to organize this and provide us with the technology to do this so that we can reach out to you and have a chance to interact with you. And just to remind you, if you're taking notes and listening while the four of us are speaking and you have a question, please put the question in the chat. We'll have a chance to answer them after we've each had an opportunity to speak. I also want to say how honored and humbled I am to be able to work with this team. I will echo my colleagues' comments in terms of it's an amazing team of people who bring a set of skills and expertise and perspectives that serve, I believe, serve the residents of District 19 very well. And we are all at your service and work hard to make sure that we're representing you well. So thanks for this opportunity. I'm hoping to have the opportunity to work with this team again, beginning in 2023 for the 4 years after that. I wanted to start my remarks tonight with something from a report that was just released late last week. The Attorney General publishes a report about the number of complaints that they get from regarding healthcare coverage and denials of claims. And what they have discovered is that in this past year, more than 50% of the claims that are appealed are granted. So it says that all a person needs to know is how to appeal a claim in order to have at least a 50% chance of getting the services that they received reimbursed by their insurance carrier. And I bring that to folks' attention so that they know and can say to folks when they hear from, when they experience it, or hear it from their neighbors or their family, I don't understand. My doctor thought that this would be covered, and now I'm hearing from my insurance company that they won't cover it. And I'm out of pocket $1,500 or something. And you can say to them, but you can appeal that. And it's through the Attorney General. It's their Health Education Advocacy Unit and Health and Education Advocacy Unit. You just go to the Attorney General's website, click there, and the process, I happen to know that unit well. They worked well with the Health and Government Operations Committee. So they can help you walk through the process or to see what the possibilities are. And like I said, you have a 50-50 chance of getting it reimbursed. So just a little information out there and make sure that the public knows it. That's something they should do. So I'm, as the senator said, I am on the Health and Government Operations Committee, have been there for the last 11 years. And we passed some pretty significant legislation in 2021 around medical debt and telehealth. So we're going to be continuing some of that work. But I think I just want to talk about a couple of really significant bills that are kind of come through the committee this year that we're going to be hearing about and that we're going to need a lot of community support and organization around. I think the biggest one is women's reproductive health and rights. In Maryland, all of the insurance carriers are pay for whatever the plan says for a woman if the woman chooses to terminate a pregnancy, except for Medicaid. Medicaid is prohibited from, at this point in Maryland law, for paying for any of those services. And we'd like to turn that around. So basically what it means is if you can afford commercial insurance, then you have all kinds of choices and options and rights. But if you can't afford it, then you don't. And we want to change that. We spent a lot of time on the floor of the House last year talking about equity of opportunities, all kinds of opportunities and recognizing equity in rights and social justice. This is just an example of a place where we are lacking in Maryland. And it is, we're not laying any new ground here. There are many states that do this already. And so, but it is going to be one that I expect there will need to be a lot of work on. We are also going to be discussing a fairly significant bill that will pilot a new way to reimburse doctors. One of the things that's happened recently is we're losing our primary care doctors, and we're losing them because they can't afford to keep their practices open. So either one of two things happen. One, they fold up and go into research or do something else, or they go to work for a hospital, which is a very different model of service. And so one of the things that other folks have tried, other states have tried, not a lot yet. This is still in experimental stages in a lot of states, but it's where it's called value-based pricing. And basically what it does is it guarantees physicians a certain amount of reimbursement, which will not force them, but will stop them from being forced to be like factories of turning out patients. And so they're going to be assessed on their ability, their patient contact, but it doesn't have to be different patients. It can be the same patient that they needed to follow up on. And so we think that this is going to help a lot of our primary care doctors stay in practice, and we'll be able to have more personal relationships with them. 3 years ago, we established what we call the reinsurance program for insurance. And basically what that did was allow us to cut insurance rates, because what it does is it's sort of a program that protects the insurance companies from catastrophic loss. That program has worked extremely well. We're going to be discussing it this year. It expires in 2023. So we're going to be discussing it this year to make sure that this kind of program can be sustained over time. It does require funding. Right now, the funding is provided by insurance companies into this program. They pay a certain percentage, as well as some subsidies from the federal government. So that's going to be a big thing that we're going to be talking about. And then two big personal bills that I wanted to just mention to you. Again, speaking about equity, I have been a big advocate for dental care since I began with in the legislature. In fact, my very first year as a delegate, I spoke with the chief medical officer and a dentist with a big insurance company. And I asked why insurance was not didn't cover dental services at the same level they cover medical services. And we were told, I was told, because that's the way it always was. And then I got a history lesson in how dental care began in barbershops, which was not really what I was seeking. This status quo doesn't work anymore. So what we are going to be working on is, it's a very significant bill that will require Medicaid to cover adult dental services. Right now, Medicaid only covers dental services for pregnant women and for children. And this bill would open it up and include all adults who are now receiving Medicaid. So I'm excited about that bill and looking forward to working on it. And then another bill that I'm working on that's fairly significant is the state gets a certain number of slots for folks who are primarily seniors, but also folks with disabilities who need 24-hour or 16-hour care in their homes, and they want to stay in their homes and not go to nursing homes. The state has not used up about 1/3 of the slots it's been allowed by the federal government, and it has a waiting list of 20,000 people. I have put this bill in 4 times with Senator Kelly from the Finance Committee in the Senate. Each year we run into a brick wall at the Department of Health, and we're going to try to run right through the wall this year and see if we can't literally shame the Department of Health into doing something about that waiting list and filling the rest of the slots that are available to us. And lastly, I'm working with our good senator on a bill that will give people the opportunity and the encouragement to complete advanced directives and have them uploaded so that if you have to go to the hospital in an emergency situation and the doctors need to know what your wishes are, and they don't have, they may not be able to contact somebody very quickly, they can pull this up and they have a sense of what you want. I think it's important for us as we plan in terms of making sure that what happens to us when we are ill is what we want to happen to us. So I'm happy to be working with the senator on that bill. And with that, again, I thank you for this opportunity, and I'm going to turn you over to Delegate Crutchfield.
Thank you, Delegate Cullison. And thank you, everybody, for being here this evening. This is really important to us because we want to make sure you understand and know what we're doing in Annapolis and what is upcoming for us. I also want to thank again the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee for all their assistance tonight, technically, because we could not make this happen without you, and especially Michael Tardif for doing this for us. And I appreciate, and I must emphasize, appreciate my delegation, my Senator Ben Kramer, the 2 delegates, Bonnie Cullison and Von Stewart. I just appreciate working with you all. You always are there for me when I have questions, concerns. And I think we just work together really as a family. We really work well together. So I just appreciate you all. So I want to just mention just a little bit about what's going on. I serve on the House Judiciary Committee, And I am the chair of a combined subcommittee of family law and juvenile law. And so what's kind of coming down the pike, we believe anyway, this next session is that family law will kind of emphasize a little bit more on divorce, and in particular, the grounds for divorce, making it a little easier, due to obviously the pandemic, there's economic issues. And so allowing people to get that freedom to be able to disconnect, I'll put it like that, with their spouse if they need to. Also, we're going to probably take up some concerning issues with grandparents' rights, and that being grandparents' rights to visitation as well as custody. That is something new on the forefront. A lot of grandparents are concerned about not being as involved as they would like to be. So we're definitely going to see that coming up. On the juvenile law section, I think a lot of emphasis is really going to be on reform. The Juvenile Justice Reform Council just completed and did a final report to the General Assembly regarding issues under the juvenile justice system. Unfortunately, we have in Maryland dealt with the ramifications of past issues that created what I want to say was a belief that young people could be super predators. And this is all kind of the remnants of the anti-drug war, et cetera. And so we now need to go back and clean that up, okay? And we really need to make our juvenile justice system what it should be, which is a system for rehabilitation of young people. And so with that in mind, there's a lot of areas that we just, we need to work on in Maryland. One of those areas is with directly charging young people with felonies and then putting them into the adult prisons immediately. We need to eliminate that. That's called direct charge. And we need to eliminate that as a grounds for immediately putting children into the prison system. Children should really go into the juvenile detention centers and not into the adult centers. And there's a lot of data around that, what happens, recidivism, all of that, because of children going immediately into adult prisons. The other thing we need to really do is we need to have a firm and committed age of jurisdiction. It's ridiculous to have children as young as 7 and 8 to be charged with offenses and actually put into the juvenile system. So it is our desire also to hopefully change that and to actually have a specific age of either 12 or 13 for young people to actually be confined if they must be. The other thing that we're really looking at too in reforming the juvenile system is the fact that we need to think about not confining young people when they have been charged with a misdemeanor or a technical offense. There are other out-of-court ways in which they can be deterred from continuing down a path of, a possible prison, et cetera, in the future. So those are some of the things where we're going to be looking at, as well as, just looking at some of the diversionary programs, making sure those programs are culturally competent and also evidence-based, and that there's research around them to make sure that children are going into the right programs to further defer them. One of the things that I'm going to work on personally, and I've done this for the last couple of sessions, is to eliminate something called the felony murder statute, which as it applies to juveniles in particular. And so the best way to explain it is felony murder is a really quick means, I'll put it that way, for someone to be charged immediately under the penalty of first-degree murder, which is life in prison and life in prison without parole. There's evidence that indicates that children do not have the capacity to understand all of the elements of what they're doing and therefore the consequences, and should not be charged at, or should not have a penalty of life in prison. And so what I'm attempting to do is eliminate this rule as it applies to children, meaning that if a child is in an area where a felony occurs and there is a death, that they will no longer, if they did not participate in that specific crime that involved the death, that they will not be charged with that death. And that's how the felony murder rule works. But again, I'd like to see that hopefully eliminated as it involves children. One of the other things that I'm going to focus on again this coming session, and again, this is a bill that I brought a couple of sessions, and that is to repeal the spousal defense. And a spousal defense is actually a specific shield from prosecution that spouses have when they commit a sexual assault against their spouse. So in other words, they cannot be prosecuted. I mean, this is totally archaic. It's also just, quite frankly, unfair that someone can date someone and charge that person with a sexual assault crime, and that person can be punished, but you cannot do that with your own spouse. So that is another area that I'd really like to see us move on and repeal. Also, one of the things, again, just kind of going back and reminiscing about what we did last session with police accountability and also transparency, I am going to, and I have already sponsored a local bill that will hopefully provide to the county council the ability to transfer from the police department the authority to now actually have the Department of Transportation be in charge of our automated transportation devices, such as speed cameras, school bus cameras. So in other words, this would no longer be under the police department, but could be transferred to the Department of Transportation. And so this is just giving authority to the county council to decide based on their wisdom, their thought about this, to actually transfer it over to the Department of Transportation. And finally, one of the bills that I'm going to be working on with my cross-filer, which is Senator Ben Cramer, is to hopefully create civil penalties for hate crimes. Delegate Stewart brought a wonderful hate crimes bill that was passed last session, dealing with giving people who actually are convicted of hate crimes with further kind of diversionary programs, such as training and other things. Well, now we want to also be able to give that person who a hate crime has been committed against the ability to bring civil penalties against the person that they're accusing. And hopefully that will help to sort of, make sure that a lot of the issues that come around hate crimes, such as we see damage to buildings, destruction of property, some of those things are taken care of under this type of bill. I, again, am continuing to work on things and looking forward to hearing from you if there's other areas that you're interested in me working with you on, and to also just do what we can to make sure that, I continue to do the work for you. So again, thank you very much. And I'm going to pass the baton on to my great Senator Ben Cramer. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that, Delegate Crutchfield. I appreciate the intro. And folks, let me tell you, as I said, we have an outstanding team here in District 19, and you can rest assured there is no group working harder, pardon me, in Annapolis than this team right here. I was remiss at the beginning of this program not to introduce, and I hadn't seen him, so I apologize for that, our outstanding County Council President, Tom Hucker. Council President Hucker and I served together in the Maryland House of Delegates. We served on the same committee together, and I can share with you that he is a very skilled, very talented, very deliberate and thoughtful legislator here in county government, as he was as a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. So Council President Hucker, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me tonight.
Rolling on to what's coming up in December with the veto overrides. I have two bills that passed last session that Governor Hogan overrode, and both of them were common sense bills. The first one that Delegate Stewart touched on deals with collective bargaining for the University of Maryland system employees. Right now, there is an antiquated, convoluted process for bargaining with the University of Maryland system. Each one of the various components of the system negotiates its own individual contract, and then it goes up to the Board of Regents for review. And if the Board of Regents doesn't approve any or all part of it, they send it back down to the university. So it could be Salisbury, it could be Frostburg, it could be College Park, University of Maryland, Baltimore County. There are 15 different contracts that are currently negotiated with all the various component pieces of the system. It is incredibly inefficient. It is extremely expensive, and it works very much against the employees of the system. So the bill that we passed last session that I sponsored would have all negotiations done as an umbrella, one negotiation that covers every one of the various institutions within the system. It's common sense. It's what we do right now in state government. Not every state agency goes and negotiates its contract with the state. We negotiate one contract for all state agencies, regardless of what it is or where it is, one contract. So that's what this bill did. My colleagues in the legislature passed it, and Governor Hogan vetoed it. So we will be taking that bill up when we get back to Annapolis for the special session. The other one I passed dealt with prevailing wages and the fact that we want to ensure that underground utilities, which are now, and let me just quickly explain it. There was a time when our public utilities did the work themselves to build their infrastructure. They realized they could start doing it more cheaply by contracting out the work to the lowest bidders. So that becomes a serious problem when we are talking about underground gas and electric infrastructure. So the bill that I sponsored stops the race to the bottom, puts in place prevailing wage requirements so that now the utilities aren't out there giving this work to the cheapest bidder, and then we find out they're doing the cheapest work, and then putting all of our residents at risk, which is exactly what has been happening. It put in prevailing wage standards to ensure that the utility companies are going to be hiring companies that are doing excellent work, not substandard work. Not surprisingly, Governor Hogan also vetoed that bill, but I am confident we will override it in the upcoming special session. As I mentioned, I am on the Finance Committee, and I think what will be sucking a lot of the oxygen out of the room in that committee this session will be recreational cannabis. I am one of 5 members of the Senate that are working at the moment on trying to envision how legislation might reflect having recreational cannabis here in the state. It is exceedingly complex. Everything from how it will be structured between wholesalers, distribution, and retailers, how it will be licensed, how many licenses, what will we do with the existing medical cannabis system that we have in the state, should we pass recreational cannabis. And my role in this small group that is working on this issue, my role is particularly focused on issues of public health, public welfare, and public safety, should we pass recreational cannabis, so that we are very thoughtful about ensuring we are not, or minimizing access to our youth, that we are looking at issues regarding secondhand smoke, and those people who don't want to be exposed to secondhand smoke from cannabis in multi-unit dwellings. Cannabis has a very, very pungent odor, which can be very troubling for a lot of folks who are living in apartments, living in condominiums. And we also need to be very cognizant of drunk and drugged driving. That's an issue that I have been working on since I came to the legislature. So these are very important pieces that need to be addressed as we're moving forward. But it does appear as though there's a good possibility that recreational cannabis will be on the ballot for voters coming up soon. And then we need to know what will be the structure. With my regard to my own personal legislation, once again, I will be working on a number of environmental pieces. A couple of bills I'll be introducing will continue to expand opportunities for using solar and community solar. I'm very proud and pleased to say that last month, for the second time now, Delegate Lou Clippinger and I were named as Legislators of the Year by community solar organizations here in the state for our work on this issue and expanding access to community solar. I will also be introducing the Climate Crisis and Environmental Justice Act, which for the first time would make the fossil fuel industry pay the cost of their pollution. It is long overdue. It would bring in hundreds of millions of dollars to the state, which under the bill will then be channeled into two major categories. One, it will send a regular quarterly check to the lowest 50% income earners in our state to help stabilize them and to help them, because they are the ones who are clearly most exposed to the carbon pollution and the harm and the damage from carbon pollution. The other 50% of the revenues, and we are talking hundreds of millions of dollars that the fossil fuel industry owes all of us, and that would go to every jurisdiction based on qualified green energy projects, renewable energy projects, or infrastructure to push back against the harm that is already occurring because of the damage from the climate crisis. So I'll be working on that legislation. It's a long shot. Unfortunately, the oil industry and the fossil fuel industry are very powerful, and they'll be fighting this legislation tooth and nail. I will also be introducing a gas guzzler bill so that the vehicles sold that have the highest emissions will have a fee associated with those emissions. And those are typically the big Suburbans, the Expeditions, some of the large pickup trucks. And that fee will go directly into a fund to give credits for consumers who are purchasing electric vehicles, because we know for a fact that vehicles are the greatest contributor now to pollution in our state. So looking forward to working on that. Great minds think alike. Delegate Stewart was talking about a tax credit for long-term care. Senator Kathy Klausmeyer and I have been having that conversation. She has worked on this issue in the past. We are looking at legislation going forward. To date, it has not been successful, but it's very important that we start to address the spiraling costs of long-term care. I also will be working on legislation that will prohibit our universities and colleges from withholding transcripts of students who have debt. The problem with that is that for many of these students who either want to transfer or get their transcripts so they can get a job and prove that what they've accomplished, they can't get their transcripts because they have debt. Well, then they can't get the job to pay their debt, or they can transfer to another university to finish their education to get a job to pay their debt. But right now, our university systems and colleges withhold those transcripts until the debt is paid. So the legislation I'll be introducing will be to prohibit that practice. And then just real fast, wrapping it up, my colleagues, Delegate Cullison and Delegate Crutchfield mentioned legislation that we will be working on together in the upcoming session. Delegate Cullison and I on this issue of advanced directives, extremely important when people are in the hospital in an emergency situation, and for physicians to know what the wishes are. And it's not about just death. It's about health, how it is you want to be treated. And we need to get people to know about advanced directives and give a single source for all of our hospitals and physicians to access to get the information about those advanced directives. Delegate Crutchfield and I will be working on that civil hate crimes legislation. Maryland is in a minority of states that does not have a statute on the books providing for a civil remedy for victims of hate crimes. It's long overdue we get that passed. I know Delegate Crutchfield and I are looking forward to getting to work on that. And Delegate Stewart and I will be introducing legislation to bring parity on the issue of insurance deductibles for cooperative housing units that currently exist for condominium housing units. So we'll be working on that. We also will have a bill on a very similar subject to require folks who live in co-ops to provide proof of insurance so that their board of directors know that their units are insured to protect all of the residents within a co-op building. And with that, I think we're ready to start taking questions. And again, thank you all for being here. I'll tell you what, I had some questions, and I don't know whether, Michael, do you have the questions that we received?
I do have them.
All right, let me ask you this. Would you be willing to, or are you prepared to take a look at a couple of questions, pose them, see which of those of us in the delegation might respond? And I'll take a moment to take a look in the chat room and see if we've got some questions there that we might also ask.
Sure. I guess I'll choose them randomly, but one question from Stephen Klein, the administrator for the Montgomery County delegation, Rebecca Steyer, sent me a list of, I believe, 30 bills to be vetted on December 6th and 13. Those are specific Montgomery County related bills. Where does the delegation stand on these bills? Vaughn, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I wasn't actually trying to move my mouth, but I guess I'll take a crack at it. So, well, the short answer to this is that for the bills that have been introduced in previous sessions, there is a vote for the local bills. And what Michael is talking about and what the question is talking about here is that Outside of our roles in sort of like statewide legislation, the Montgomery County delegation, there are 24 delegates, of which we are 3 in District 19, and there are 8 senators, which Senator Kramer is one of those. We collectively look at legislation that would only apply to Montgomery County. And so what the question is talking about is the almost 3 dozen bills that have been introduced this session of so-called local legislation. And for those bills, we actually usually we have a hearing in Rockville. This time it'll be virtual like the last couple of years, but we have virtual hearings every year in December to vet that legislation. And so the short answer there is that for a few of the bills, our name is on them as co-sponsors or as primary sponsors. I know that Delegate Crutchfield already mentioned the local bill that she'll be doing this time. So that's an easy indication that we support it. Some of them have been introduced in previous sessions and we have a voting record and probably will be sticking to that. And then for the rest of them, for sort of matters of first impression, I'm sure a few of us have formulated initial opinions on a few of those bills, but for the most part, we'll be sort of waiting to see how the hearings go before sort of deciding where we stand on the rest of them. And I would encourage everyone to tune in on December the 6th and December the 13th to, and I think we can probably put those links in the chat as well. You can sign up to testify. You can just watch it from the comfort of your own home. But yeah, if you have any strong opinions on any of the 30, please sign up to testify, either just on your own through the link, or you could even contact the chief sponsor of the bill to sort of coordinate, your testimony with anyone else who's testifying.
And you can sign up to testify certainly in the hearing, but if you want to communicate with any of the 4 of us independently about a particular bill, please feel free to do that as well.
Michael, I saw a couple of questions that I might like to tackle before I continue reading. One of them was, in fact, it's in the chat as well as in the questions that were submitted earlier. And it's a question about ghost guns. And what I would like to just make sure everybody understands is that we didn't get a chance last session to bring back what we have brought in, I guess, the last 2 sessions, which is to eliminate the possession of ghost guns, and also to require, if people already have them, that they have a serial number and that they're actually, someplace as other guns are and registered. So ghost guns continue to be an effort that I know the General Assembly will take up and continue to fight for. Delegate Leslie Lopez on the Judiciary Committee is sort of our expert on ghost guns and will probably bring back, as she did last session, a similar bill to again do just what I described, which is it'll do both things. It'll eliminate ghost guns, and these are guns that are created, I want to say manufactured by individuals, because they are 3D models, etc., that people can actually purchase or from a website and create themselves. And so again, it will be to eliminate possession of those guns, and also to make sure that if you do have them, that they're registered or serialized in some way so that we keep track of them. I saw another question about income tax exemptions for veterans. And I just want to say that I definitely personally agree that we need to work on this measure. It is something that's done in many states right now. And in fact, what I'd like to also see, because I am the surviving spouse of a veteran, is that I'd like to see us to also exempt the income of surviving spouses as well. So again, that's something I definitely would agree to support. And I do believe that it will also come up again. I'm not sure that it'll happen this session or not, but I do know that that is something that I know the Veterans Caucus works on and has under as its priority as well. Thank you, Michael.
Sure. Mary Abel of Silver Spring had asked a question on an issue of longstanding concern. When will Maryland's back unemployment funds be released to families who have anxiously been awaiting funds for a very long time?
I am happy to take a stab at that, and I can share with Mary and all of you that we in the legislature have been working tirelessly trying to get people their unemployment insurance benefits. This has been a disaster out of the gate from day one. The Hogan administration has steadfastly refused to acknowledge that they have been failing. It is a state agency, and Governor Hogan has the ability to get it worked out. I will share with you that he had cut that department because Hogan wants his legacy to be that government was smaller when he left than when he came in. So he has been slashing positions in state government throughout his tenure as governor. He slashed the unemployment division close to 40% of its employees when the pandemic hit. So they were already short-staffed, and then he spent $50 million on a new computer system for unemployment insurance division that collapsed for the first week it went into practice. It has been a disaster ever since. He has refused to acknowledge his failure. We in the legislature are limited as to what we can do with his agency, but we have been trying very hard to improve the benefits, to expand the benefits that are being offered, and still are daily. There is not a day that goes by that every member of the legislature does not hear from folks who are trying to get unemployment benefits.
No.
We are constantly on the phone with the unemployment division, with lists of constituents in each of our districts who are trying to get their deserved and needed unemployment benefits. And it has just been inexcusable the way Governor Hogan has allowed this agency to operate. And it has been one of the most inefficient in the entire country. And it's an embarrassment. And but we in the legislature are on a daily basis desperately trying to help people get their benefits.
There's another question of concern to veterans from Robert Norton of Durwood. Can you support expanding the use of the Maryland Veterans Trust Fund to provide grants from the fund for complementary and alternative medical therapies for veterans? And he references from the last legislative session, HB 874.
And all I can offer, and I doubt any of my colleagues might have any more to offer on it. This was a bill that was introduced last session, and I believe it went into the Ways and Means Committee, and it never received a vote. I was not familiar with it until I saw this question, tried to get a little bit of background on it, but there really is no background to be had because a bill hearing was held. I don't know what the pros and cons. It certainly sounds like there could be some positives that come out of it. But I guess we'll have to try to see if we can get a handle on what happened last session. None of us serve on the Ways and Means Committee. We would not have been privy to that bill hearing. And because there was a hearing and it went no further, there was not an opportunity to become any more familiar with it. So that's all I have to offer, unless either any of my colleagues are intimately familiar with it. I did see a question from Roger Blacklow, our president of the Leisure World Democratic Club, and we can all take that one on together. The question from Roger is, will you still be our representatives in the next session of the Assembly? Well, Roger, God willing, and the creek don't rise, and the good residents and the good residents of District 19 see fit to vote for us, we will be back. And as I said, There is no harder working delegation in all of Annapolis than we are. We are running as a team together for reelection. We click exceedingly well, and we're looking forward, if nothing else, to continuing our public service, and very much appreciate the faith and trust that the residents of District 19 have in us. So happy to let my colleagues jump in on that one if they'd like.
Ditto.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I should mention that the legislative redistricting process for our own maps, I neglected to mention, it will actually be during the regular session in 2022. So the special session is only congressional maps, but obviously we hope that all of you have the pleasure of remaining in District 19. And specifically, the point about Leisure World, I mean, I think, Roger, if you were referring to Leisure World specifically in your question, then I would say that over all 4 of our dead bodies would we ever relinquish Leisure World. But I also know that we all hope that the map stays as close to its current form as possible, and I have every expectation that will be the case. So to the extent that there are any changes to the state legislative maps, they will be extremely minor and probably relatively imperceptible to the naked eye.
And all 4 of us sort of live in the center of the district. So, it's not like there would be, picking off at the edges, which sometimes happens. So unless there were some very dramatic, like creating 3 single districts or something like odd like that, we would all still be in District 19. Of course, it could be another number. We don't know. No, I'm kidding.
There were a couple of questions submitted by Jean Tungara of Silver Spring, actually 3, but I'm going to ask 2 of them. Could you update us on the Maryland Remembrance Commission's progress? And how will the recently passed federal infrastructure bill affect Montgomery County, if you know, at that level of detail?
With regard to infrastructure funds, Maryland is going to be doing very well. I don't know whether it's gotten down to the level of local government to know how our counties will fare. We do have our council president here. If he knows something that I don't about how those resources might be utilized at the county level, that happy to have him jump in. But I'm not sure that it has filtered to that level yet. President Hucker, what do you got?
I'm sorry, Senator. Could you restate the question? My children were screaming here. I don't have any other excuse. I'm sorry.
I don't miss those days.
Come on over.
The question was, do we know at this point how Montgomery County will fare from the federal infrastructure bill that is moving towards us? I said I don't know whether, now Maryland in itself is going to do very well. We're going to get a lot of money here in the state for infrastructure needs, but I am unaware of it actually, any details about it getting to local government at this point. Am I correct in that?
Let me see. Give me just a second. I had some information this morning at my weekly press conference about the how much is expected to come to the county. There is, I think, what do we say, 6 billion? Well, I guess it's probably not determined yet because you all have to decide that, divide that up at the state level, and the governor. What, 6 billion for transportation, 1.7 billion of which will be for transit, right? And I can tell you, I met with Secretary Buttigieg several months ago, along with Congressman Brown. And Congressman Brown is our only Maryland representative on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. And I went through with Secretary Pete 6 different transit projects that have been approved and design, and some of them designed in Montgomery County, but never funded by the federal government, including the Corridor Cities Transitway up county connecting sort of Gaithersburg to Clarksburg, the expansion of the Purple Line, the Red Line continuation up to Frederick, which was conceived years ago and never built out, and the county's bus rapid transit lines, which go up 355. They're already running up US 29, and in District 19, crossing from Wheaton all through District 19 to Rockville. So I'd like to see federal funding for all those programs, as well as for some of our local parks and other things like that. But I don't think the decision's been made yet about how much goes to Montgomery County.
Thank you for that. And my apologies, but unless my colleagues have some information on the Maryland Remembrance Commission, I have nothing to offer with regard to that.
Okay, I think I can just add just a little bit to that. And that is that I know that the focus really has been with that particular commission dealing with a lot of the efforts around lynchings, and in particular, like down in Talbot County and some of the other counties on the shore. However, let me just mention this to you, and that is that the Montgomery County lynching, I can't remember what exactly it's called. I think it's called the Lynching Remembrance Commission also, has been very, very active here in Montgomery County. In fact, my family has been involved with the latest tour that they gave. And it was a very, I think it was a very informative tour around Rockville and going to the various lynching locations. So please look that up, Google it, and just see what Montgomery County is doing, because it looks like they're doing a lot in remembrance of those individuals that were unfortunately lynched in the county.
Shifting gears a bit, there's a question from Krista Tichy of Rockville. In June, the council reopened Avery Road Treatment Facility for mental health and substance issues. As a county district and a district, we need to continue this type of treatment with outpatient services so these patients do not fall into a cycle of recurrence. What are your thoughts on support systems that could come into place after a 30-day treatment program?
So if you hadn't asked that question, Michael, I was going to ask it. So thank you for raising it. Over the last term, the issue of mental health supports and resources has been a significant part of the work that the Health and Government Operations Committee has been doing. And we are seeking and have not yet achieved the goal of equitable resources in order to pay for mental health services. I mean, as a country, we're really at the beginning of, finding ways to make sure that our treatment programs work. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, having a mental illness was sometimes, just swept under the rug or not believed or not considered a real ailment. And it's because of the ACA that we began to recognize that this is every bit as serious as the somatic concerns that we have. The suicide rate in this state and in the country is abysmal. It's in young people are particularly affected by it, which is one of the reasons for the Tommy Raskin Act, which we passed in 2021, which allows folks who have a mental illness to have a point of contact. But I want to get to Krista's question. There are currently programs which are on a sort of an outpatient basis where individuals can come and receive the psychological support that they need from a psychological professional, where they can work with others, where they get job training, where there's transition training from these inpatient settings to enable them to re-enter the workforce in a productive and effective ways. There aren't enough of them. I mean, that is the bottom line. So for me, that is one highly effective way for us to help these individuals, re-enter and be successful, but we've got to put money into these programs. But the very first thing we have to do is to find the professionals. And right now we have and this is a national issue. It's not just a Maryland issue, that there just are not enough mental health professionals in general. That's number one. But number two, who are accepting insurance, because the insurance reimbursements are much lower than what they can get in a private, as a private payer. So it is something that we're working on. The Maryland Insurance Administration is, doing its due diligence in looking at what each insurance carrier is doing with respect to trying to increase its network of mental health providers. And we are working with them on trying to figure out what the reimbursement rates might be in order to encourage more of them to come in. The other thing we were able to do with the telehealth bill is to increase the access to mental health through telehealth. And we saw a lot of good things come out of the pandemic, in that people were able to access those services through telehealth, both audio and visual. And we saw, good results with that. The folks were telling us it really helped them to survive very difficult times. So those are a couple of ideas, and I don't know that they're not, that certainly isn't all inclusive, but the bottom line is professionals, two bottom lines, professionals and resources.
Alana Landsman had submitted a question in advance and also posted it in the chat just now. Will all of D19 teams support the Time to Care Act, paid family and medical leave, and have Maryland as a leader on this issue that's deeply affecting the women in lower income families?
Yeah.
And thank you for that question, Alana. I have been working with some of the members on the Economic Matters Committee to see if we will be able to move this legislation forward this coming session. It looks like there might be an opportunity to get the bill going. There has been some turnover now in the Economic Matters Committee. Both the chair and the vice chair of that committee in the House of Delegates are leaving. So that kind of has thrown everything out of whack right now, and trying to get a handle on some of the cooperative effort between Finance Committee in the Senate and Economic Matters in the House, where it looked like we were on track to maybe figure out how to get some of this legislation passed. We suddenly found that the chair of the committee is now likely to be elected as the treasurer of the state during the special session, in fact, coming up in December. And the vice chair of the committee was just appointed to the circuit court in Montgomery County. So we're going to have to figure out who the new chair and vice chair are over there before we can, again, sort of engage on getting this worked out. But I can say, at least as of this sudden change, it sounded like we were on track to get something done this session on that. And hopefully it'll stay that way.
Barbara Nouveau notes that Delegate Stewart is co-sponsoring the enabling legislation for Montgomery County to be able to select the voting method for certain local elections. In other words, the ranked choice voting bill. Where do other members of the delegation stand on this bill that we last tried to pass 2 years ago?
I can speak for myself, say that I supported the bill when it came to a vote in our subcommittee. I think we see the results when you have 34 people running for 4 seats. And, there's clearly not a majority of folks who are voting for those candidates. And so I think what ranked choice voting does is enables us to get a higher percentage of support for candidates in those very big races. I mean, it's a good problem to have. in terms of having a large number of people who want to run for public office and are committed to public service. But at the same time, you want to make sure that those people have that those who are elected have the support and confidence of a large percentage of the voting public. So I have supported ranked choice voting. I think it's shown that it can work, and we would just need to, the county could take that on and I think be successful with it.
Roger Blacklow asks, we haven't seen anything on Afghan refugees in Maryland. I'm assuming he's talking about public news sources. Do we have a safety net for them? Do we have a program for accepting Afghan refugees in Maryland? And how can our members get involved?
Anybody have any feedback on that? I am not familiar with anything at the legislative level.
There are a few nonprofits that are focused on that. If you'd like, Roger, I can probably do some quick research. I believe the county has also been working with some nonprofits. I can, or I'm sure President Hucker would be happy to share with you some resources. I'm a firm believer, just on the topic, that we should take as many Afghan refugees as humanly possible, and that Maryland should be the capital of Afghan resettlement. And whether that means we have to put more government resources into it, I would be supportive of that. But I know that since those resettlement efforts have begun, a lot of local nonprofits have been really doing yeoman's work to make sure that those folks are comfortable here in the DC area. And it looks like Councilmember Hucker, or Council President Hucker, is unmuted, so obviously feel free to chime in.
I think I agree with everything Delegate Vaughn said. Many of us have followed this issue. A lot of our allies in Afghanistan are, people we owe a debt to. They fought and protected our soldiers and translated for them and performed other critical services. And now many of them, have had to move here in fear for their lives. So as in many issues, I don't want to editorialize too much, but Governor Hogan talks a little bit better game than he executes. He has made similar statements, but then he's only accepted a very small number, set a very, very low target for Maryland to accept Afghan refugees. But yes, many of them will come to Montgomery County, probably a disproportionate number if it's like other. I've worked with some of our local families that are accepting them, and there's local nonprofits like the Lutheran Immigration Services and others that are connecting them with services locally, and we provide them with county funds to do that. So if you're interested in that, just follow up with me offline. And I know there's different volunteer efforts that families are involved in, and you can also volunteer to house someone in your home. Thank you so much.
And if I can jump in our chat room, I saw, not on this subject, moving on to other things in the chat room. Justin, I saw your comment about cannabis and facilitating the legislation, and the reference to we've got all these other states to look to. I will share with you that I've got the legislation from every one of those states sitting on my desk, and I've been reading through and highlighting and noting. Quite frankly, every one of the states has done it differently. We are hoping to find the best practices and take the best parts of all those states, but it still is a very complex and challenging prospect to establish the cannabis program. But I agree with you that trying to take the best out of what other states have done is very helpful, and that is something that we are doing. So I just wanted to share that with you.
I'm mindful of the time. I'm going to turn it back over to the four of you for closing remarks.
Well, I just want to thank you again, Michael, for being the guy behind the screen or behind the curtain. We are paying attention to the guy behind the curtain. Thank you very much. And to the Central Committee for supporting us. And thank you to the folks who were here tonight. Thank you, and for your thoughtful questions and your engagement and participation in government. We really appreciate your participation And as the senator started us off with, we're here for you and we're here to serve you. So thoughts, ideas, we're open. Please contact us and have a good evening.
Well, I guess I'll go next. I just want to, again, thank everybody for being here. And we all know how hard it is to be a candidate, to run for office. And I noticed that we have about 5 candidates actually here. And I just wanted to give a little shout out to all of them for taking that, that first step and jumping out there into a race. I see Natalie Fanny Gonzalez. I see Tom DeGonia, Jeremiah Pope, Lorianne Sales, and Marilyn Pierre. Thank you all for coming and being a part of this with us. We appreciate you too. Thanks again. And thanks definitely, Mr. President of our County Council, Tom Hucker, for being here. We appreciate you.
Can you send the voice up, please?
Thank you so much for having me. I put my cell phone in the chat and email. If I can help with anything, please reach out right away.
And I will go next and let the senator close. But yeah, thank you for sure to Michael, to the County Democratic Party for helping us throw this together. There's absolutely no way the 4 of us could be able to pull off this without their help. So really appreciate Michael as always. Appreciate the council president for joining us, and appreciate all of y'all because the District 19 team. It may be the us 4 whose names will be on the ballot, but I really think that all of y'all and the entire community is part of the District 19 team. Because it's only through you that we get a lot of ideas and feedback on legislation that we either introduce or that we ultimately vote on. And so I just am really proud to serve you in Annapolis, and I'm really proud to be a member of this 4-person legislative team and our 130,000 person legislative team here in the Fight in 19. So really grateful to all of y'all. Really happy to be running next year with these 3 other folks. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any comments, questions, concerns.
And with that, I will just again say thank you to Michael, to the Democratic Central Committee for giving us this opportunity to meet with you via Zoom. I think we are all longing for the day when we will routinely have the opportunity to meet in person. I am hoping this legislative session will be different than last year. And for those of you who want to come visit with us in Annapolis, that opportunity will present itself. And just stay healthy, stay well. If you're eligible, get your booster shot. And let's get this pandemic behind us. Stay well. It's so nice to see your faces. All those familiar faces that we see, and I'm very happy to see you. Take care, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night.
Take care. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Great meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.